On this episode of TQA Weekly, learn about whether or not you actually need to buy those fancy shielded cables for your multimedia devices. My name is Steve Smith. Welcome to TQA Weekly, where I answer your questions, comments, and even your topic suggestions, which you can always send me at ask@tqaweekly.com. You can go to my website, tqaweekly.com, where you can use the contact form to email me directly, interact with others on previous episodes, and even go to the subscribe page to see how you can subscribe to me on various platforms, YouTube, blip.tv, Vimeo, on iTunes, even on my social networking, which you can actually talk to me there. And last week's episode is actually the predecessor to this one. So if you haven't already seen that one, go to tqaweekly.com/SE5 EP20, or just click somewhere on the screen where I'm going to put the actual logo for that episode if you're already on YouTube. So this week's question is, do you really need those fancy shielded cables? And the reason for this is basically simple. We have something called electromagnetic interference, sometimes referred to as radio frequency interference, and we've heard this interference in plenty of speakers, seen it in a whole bunch of old televisions, and we're constantly told by salespeople in big stores like Best Buy and Future Shop and all that, that it is important to buy a high quality shielded cable to prevent any form of electromagnetic interference from disturbing our enjoyment of our multimedia experience and the transmission of our signals, and I'm going to be debunking the entire thing once and for all. So for those who didn't already know, electromagnetic interference is a very old problem, going as far as to when we had the telegraph. But due to a famous person named Alexander Graham Bell inventing the twisted pair, which allows for both sides of the cable to be equally exposed to the electromagnetic interference, allowing for the signal to actually get to the other end pretty much unedited, we're capable of transmitting signals regardless of interference from point A to point B, where the message is not actually broken. And we were able to do this because the cable was twisted as opposed to being side by side as it used to be back in the day. Now, fast forward hundreds of years, and we still do that. It is still part of every single part of every single cable that we actually build up. So irregardless of whether it's USB, RJ45, DisplayPort, VGA, HDMI, everything, you have these twisted pairs inside of every single one of these cables, and most of these cables already have some kind of shielding, even at the most basic cable, even at the lowest price, because the standards dictate the way that these cables are going to be built. Because we already have standards on the way that these cables are going to be built, we already know how they're going to function. Also, because digital cables function differently to analog technology, we tend to be able to actually configure the signal going through the cable from point A to point B to a point where we could actually determine if the signal going is actually being received correctly. Because the machines will dynamically correct for errors on the fly, electromagnetic interference is a technical non-issue, meaning that you do not technically need to buy any of those super expensive, useless in most environments, fancy shielded cables. Anyway, if you need more reasoning to why you don't need these fancy shielded cables, let me remind you of something. Most countries that I have seen devices for have regulations that say that all the devices must accept some form of interference themselves. So even if the device's cables are shielded, if the device itself is being interfered with by electromagnetic interference or RF interference, there is nothing any $100, $150 cable can do about it. So, do you really need those fancy shielded cables? The answer is absolutely not. There are a few really far off situations where those cables are useful, But in your typical home or office, where RF interference is basically your cell phone, no, you don't need to spend money on those. But for places where this will be an issue, you probably won't be living there, or you probably shouldn't live in those environments. So if you have learned anything and you like this episode, don't forget to like. If you dislike this episode, go ahead and explain why, although I'm pretty sure you're a salesperson, you're going to lose $100 on a cable. And of course, if you know anybody else that can benefit from this before they buy any really expensive cables for no reason, you can always share this episode. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to this show. Have a great day and goodbye.